Hi guys, welcome back to the shop. First and foremost, thank you to anybody who has subscribed to the channel and made a comment or given feedback or stuff like that. Always good to hear, so thanks for that. Now, today's video was going to be about sharpening and maintaining a chainsaw chain and blade, bar. But I said there's probably scope there to run through the basics of a chainsaw before we move on to that sort of second part of maintenance. What we have here is 60cc saw. Wouldn't get too concerned about the size of the engine. The power output is probably a more important factor to take. And what you'll find is there that the more professional saws are slightly lower in terms of engine capacity, but higher than in terms of output, and probably also lower in terms of weight as well. So first and foremost, these are deadly dangerous bits of kit, obviously. If you try to invent something to inflict damage upon yourself, you probably couldn't do a better job. So what we do then is we take the most dangerous tool known to man, and we go out into the middle of a forest where there's branches, stumps, twigs, uneven ground, slippery wet grass, etc, etc. So all in all, the perfect environment for doing damage to yourself. So I would recommend, and strongly recommend at that, wearing the proper protection. That involves steel boots, stop you cutting your toes off, chainsaw trousers, stop you cutting your leg off, helmet, which incorporates generally ear guards, a face shield at the front, and something then to stop you hitting your head on stuff. So it's not really a negotiable issue with chainsaws. You have to gear up. Nobody wants to be that guy arriving into A&E or the emergency room with a lump missing out of his leg or his face. Now, that aside, common sense will prevail as well. If you're getting onto uneven ground, take a bit more care, slow down. What you'll find as well is if you are working in a forest or a sort of an adverse environment for a day, over the course of the day you'll get tireder and tireder. You'll start to trip more, stumble more, make stupid mistakes, etc, etc. So again, preparation of your work area and the application of common sense will see a lot of problems sort of headed off at the pass. Right, onto the chainsaw then. And if you've never come across a chainsaw before, they're a tool for cutting wood, firewood, cutting down trees, branches, etc, etc. Effectively, they're made up of two components or two sections. Number one is a power source, and the second section then is the cutting gear. And the cutting gear includes a drive sprocket here, which is a little ring or some type of geared mechanism, and that runs the chain. And if you pull up the chain on a chainsaw, you'll see in them underneath there, which run in the groove of the guide bar, they're called drive links. And that drive sprocket that we saw there a second ago, where I can get that up close, yeah, that has little indentations in it to mate up with the drive links and push them forward. Now this particular drive sprocket is actually new, just a bit rusty from hanging around the workshop for a while. Another one which I'll show you is this one, which looks newer but has wear then where you see where the drive links match into the sprocket. So basically the engine is connected to this sprocket by way of a clutch. That sprocket drives the chain forward around the bar and back into the end or the other side of the sprocket. The majority of bars will have a sprocket on the nose as well, and I have one here. I will hold that up, and what you'll see is there are teeth in there which rotate around as well, and that nose sprocket dimensions must match the dimensions of this. And when I say the dimensions, it must be the correct pitch and the correct width. Okay, now we'll cover a lot more of this sizing and chain size, etc in the maintenance side of the next video, but just to reference it now at the moment. So looking at our two components then, the power source can be either electric, which is generally battery powered. You do see some corded chainsaws, But to my mind, that's not a great mix to be bringing out an electric cord along with a rotating chain. The battery powered ones definitely have their use. If you're a homeowner who's only cutting down, you know, 1, 2, 3 trees a year, or chopping up a small bit of firewood or doing a bit of pruning, the electric is the way to go. There's no more messing with fuel mixes, carburetors, engines that won't start, etc, etc. You charge your battery, you stick it in, and away you go. You see a lot more of the professionals heading down the road of the battery packs now. Some of them on the saw themselves, and some of them on a battery pack with a lead out to the saw. So they definitely have their place. Traditionally though, the cheaper side of the market will be served then with the petrol engines. The higher power will also be served by petrol engines. So what we have here is petrol engine chainsaw with the cutting gear. And what we'll do now is we'll just disassemble the side of the chainsaw just to show you the components that we're dealing with. So I'll try and get this sort of in clear view. Generally speaking, there's 2 nuts on the side of the chainsaw. If there's 1 nut, it indicates it's a very small chainsaw, and some of them also have a sort of a toolless chain tensioner, which is basically a big knob with some type of grip on it, which you can use to tighten in. The more secure ones obviously are the ones with the 2 big nuts on them. Generally next to those 2 big nuts, either on this side of it or maybe the front side of this casing here, you'll see a little screw. And what that screw does is it pushes the bar in and out, or it pushes it out or lets it retract in, so that you get your correct chain tension here. The last thing you want is a wobbly chain or a loose chain. It catches and then it falls off, so that's no good to us. So what we'll do is we'll just loosen off these nuts. Now, just as an aside there, on the top of the saw, there's this thing here called a chain brake. And the way that operates is that either one, you can engage it by hand, and you'll hear it sort of spring loaded there, it's loaded under tension. That stops the chain moving. What it does is it contracts a wire, or sort of a wire band or a steel band, which grabs onto the clutch and stops that moving. That has 2 functions. Number 1, you can use it yourself. If the chainsaw is running and you're starting to move around the site, engage your chain brake. It doesn't cost you anything, and it's just a safety measure that if you do take a stumble, you won't hit the throttle and rev the chain. The second side of that chain brake is it's inertia mounted, right? And if we look at the saw, you'll see that the saw itself wobbles on the chassis. What that is designed to do is if you hit something on the wrong section of the bar, and I'll just do it in here, right? And you'll see here at the end of the bar, this quadrant here, right, is called the high risk kickback zone. And the way I'll explain that is if the chain is going around here, okay, and what we'll do is we'll just use this as a pretend log. So if our log is underneath, the chain is moving this way, what it'll do is it'll act to pull the saw into the wood. If you're cutting from underneath, which you may have to do sometimes, what will happen here is that the chain will be pushing against that log, and it'll be pushing the saw back towards you. Where the particularly dangerous section of that is this section here, because let's say your chain is going around at full tilt, which would be 60 or 70 miles an hour, which is over 100 kilometers an hour. There's enough movement and enough power in that chain to push the saw back that width, or a bit more even. And what it'll do then is it'll kick the saw up in the air like that. And that's called kickback, and that's probably one of the most dangerous actions or accidents that can happen. That's where your face protection comes in. Nobody wants a 60 or 70 mile an hour chain hitting their face. Okay, it's not going to end up well. So that's the kickback zone, and we'll say when that, if that does hit a piece of wood and it kicks back, it should engage that inertia brake for you. Okay, so sometimes if you're sawing along and suddenly the chain stops and it's locked solid, check your chain brake. Chances are high that the saw has pushed back, even unbeknownst to yourself, and engage that chain brake. So pull that back or check that. So on we go anyway, and what we'll do is we'll just whip apart our cutting gear here and just show you the various elements of it. This here is the bar tensioning screw. So as we loosen that, you'll see the chain start to drop. That bar moves in and out like that on two pieces of steel here, which the nuts clamp to then. Okay, so we'll take this off. Oh yeah, one last thing. Make sure that your chain brake is off before you start to disassemble this. It's a lot easier than trying to disengage that chain brake within this housing here. And I'll just show you that inside. Now, this saw is particularly dirty. The chain is blunt. The bar is heated with possibly some damage to it. This came in off the job, and I was using this as a good example of something that we'd have a look at, clean up, sharpen the chain, dress the bar, do a general sort of look over on it and fix any problems that might be there. So we'll whip off this housing here, and as you can see, covered in dirt and sawdust, etc, etc. And I'll try and hold it up to the camera there now. All right, this band here, that's the chain brake, and we'll say when that's engaged, it clamps it in, and it clamps it around the clutch here on the clutch housing on the chain. Now the way the clutch works is it's sort of a centrifugal clutch. You'll see in here in the middle that there's 3 spring sections. As the engine revs, it throws these spring sections out, and they move out. They engage with that outside clutch and drive the chain. So the chain should not be moving when the engine is idling. Right? So what we do then is we push our bar back in, and we take the chain off the front of the bar, and it's also wrapped around the dry sprocket inside that clutch there. That's our chain. This is our guide bar, and these are reversible as well. They should operate both ways. And if you're ever wondering what guide bar to get for your saw, have a look at the one that's on it, and the chances are high, or it should be the case anyway. Now, whether we can see it or not on this one, yeah. This isn't the cleanest. We'll clean this up a bit better at some point. But if we hold that up there, just beside where the retention bits of steel are, you'll see some writing there that tells you the length of the bar, and the width of the groove in the bar, and how many drive links of chain will fit on this bar. And that's the way chain is measured. It's the number of drive links of a particular type of chain. Now, to start the chainsaw, what we do is we find the primer bulb. We press that maybe 4 or 5 times to pump fuel from the fuel tank up to the carburetor. We do then is we turn on our choke and leave that out for the moment. We'll pull this 2 or 3 times until we hear a fire. At that point, we'll turn off the choke and then pull 2 or 3 more times, and then the engine should start. Now, I'm going to do this without the cutting gear on it, just for demonstration purposes. When you are starting a saw, either start it between the knees, like this, clamped between your knees, or alternatively on the ground with your foot on the handle here, okay? You see a lot of people doing a sort of a banana start, I think it's called, whereby they just pull like this. Not to be advised, and it's just one of those shortcuts which you shouldn't be taking. It's no big deal. And starting between your knees is easier on the back as well. So we're primed up with 3 or 4 pumps on the primer bulb. We have our choke on. So what we'll do now is we'll pull this 3 or 4 times until we hear a fire. Right, we got our fire, so we turn off our choke at this point, and then we pull 2 or 3 more times and it should start. Right, that's how we start a chainsaw. When you do start it with the choke, you'll find that it sort of revs higher to start. After you hit the throttle then, it should start to settle down and just go into a more normal or a more regular operation. Now, that's starting the chainsaw. We'll just turn back around now slightly. There we are. So, primer bulb, starter cord, Choke combined with on-off switch. Some chainsaws have a separate choke, a separate switch, or a clicky switch which moves from left to right. The same principles are involved in all of them. This here is your throttle and your handle. So to engage the throttle, you can't do it accidentally. You have to have your hand on the back of the handle and press that down, press that safety release down. So you press that down and then your throttle runs away happily. Now, as regards safety features on a saw, there's a lot of them, even though you mightn't be aware of them. Okay, the first one we covered there a minute ago was the chain brake or inertia brake, or sort of combined system there. Inside here as well, you'll find this fella here. This is an aluminium chain catcher. So if the chain comes off, this should assist in catching the chain before it whips back and hits your leg. Chains do come off, for a variety of reasons. Then on the saw itself, there's the body of the saw is separate from the chassis. So we'll say this part here is the bit that vibrates, and then the bit that you hold on to then should be insulated from vibration to a degree. Again, there's a safety mechanism on the throttle. There's also a hand guard here at the back to stop anything coming up and hitting you underneath. And obviously if your chain is out here and it comes off, it's looking to whip back this way. So next one then is this guard here. This protects your hand, again in case of something coming back and trying to hit you. Maybe one thing I didn't mention, chainsaw gloves, good investment, not just from a safety point of view, but from a general wear point of view. They're generally made out of leather, and the better ones have a left hand which is padded with some type of protection on the back of it there, just to stop something hitting the back of your hand. Okay, so that's roughly a chainsaw, the component parts of a chainsaw. And to put it back together now, we'll do that quickly. First thing we do, stick it down sideways there, stick our bar on. Now, as I said, we'll be maintaining this a bit better. Our chain goes on there, and you have to make sure that it's mated into the dry sprocket. So when you turn the clutch, it should turn. The chain slots around the bar, and then after the chain is in the groove of the bar, you pull the bar out to make sure that the chain is properly seated. And now this could take a bit of practice. Just check then when you have that sort of set up, that when you turn the clutch, that the chain goes around. Sometimes the chain mightn't sit into the dry sprocket back here. Okay. So next thing now we stick on is our housing. Might take a bit of wobbling, but that's okay. And that will slot in there. If that doesn't slot in easily, you might need to move the bar tensioning guide. I've never showed you that actually inside. Now stay put you, right? We'll just hold this up here. Now you'll see there that there's a little peg sticking up here, and if we move that screw, right, that bar tensioning peg should move one way or the other. So obviously that's what controls that. So if this housing or casing doesn't fit back on your two lugs here and the hole here which accepts this peg, you might need to move that back and forth. Now in this particular case, it fitted on nicely. So we snug up our nuts. And before we tighten them up, we make sure that the bar, there's always play in the bar. You'll see a wobble in it. You'll be tightening up those nuts with the bar in the upper position. But before we do that, we engage the chain tensioning device there. And as I tighten this, you should see the chain close up and just sit into the groove of the guide bar. Now the correct tension there's nothing scientific about it, okay? But when you hold it, right, you should have some little bit of play in that, right? It's not meant to be jam tight or anything like that now, but chains do loosen as they age. So what we want is a sort of a snug fit, but not an over tight fit. So holding up the bar then, we tighten up our nuts. Okay, good and tight. And that's the chainsaw ready to roll. Now, before we head out, we need two more things. Number one is fuel, or a fuel mix. All two-stroke engines require an oil additive to the petrol or gas, because what that provides then is lubrication for the piston inside in the cylinder. If you run a chainsaw or a strimmer or a weed eater or whatever they're called, or even hedge trimmers, any small two-stroke engine on neat petrol, the very least amount of damage you're going to do is score the piston against the cylinder wall, and then at an ultimate level you'll just seize the engine, and that requires an engine rebuild. So basically the way this works is I have a mixing can here, very handy for heading off. Fill up this side with the correct dosage of two-stroke oil, and every two-stroke oil, or some of them will be different than others. Read the back of it, it'll tell you how much mixes up. This one is particularly handy. It gives me a sort of a fill level here for 2 litres of fuel, or a fill level for 5 litres of fuel, which is about under half a gallon or over a gallon. So what we do there is open that, give that a squeeze. We'll come up to the first line there, reasonably level with it, and that'll give me enough mix then for 2 litres. So I put 2 litres of fuel into my mixing can, add in this, give it a good shake, and then we're ready to go with fuel mix. So that's fuel mix. Next thing then that you'll need is bar and chain oil. And the way the bar and chain oil works is there's a little pump inside there, which I should have shown you when I had the cover off, but it feeds oil through a hole in the bar, and it should sit in the groove all the way around, and the chains are designed to carry that oil around and lubricate the bar. So I'll just hold up a bigger section of chain and just try and demonstrate for you. Right, so it might look a bit odd, but we'll say the sprocket should sit in here and push the chain that way. And what you'll see there is a sort of a concave section. That's sort of half designed, or one of the design criteria behind that is to try and carry the oil forward all the way around the blade, or all the way around the bar. Okay. Now that covers off sort of the basics of chainsawing. To actually saw a piece of wood then, and let's say if you're starting off with a chainsaw, start off in a yard on a firm surface with a piece of wood, and clamp the piece of wood down as well, because the grab on these saws is fairly severe. So if the piece of wood is really light, it won't cut the wood, it'll just grab it and pull it towards you. Okay, so either get a sawhorse set up or put it in such a way that the wood can't grab. It's fine with big logs, they're going to stay put, but if you're looking at smaller branches or stuff like that that are just sitting loose in the yard, there's definitely a danger they'll be whipped, and trust me now, it's not pleasant. It's not terminal, but what you call it, getting a whip of a few branches on the legs or worse is unpleasant. So basically, set up your piece of wood in a sawhorse, or somewhere secure, or maybe somebody standing on one end of it. Make sure your chain brake is off, your saw is running, pressure throttle, the chain will rotate around the bar, and we'll cut the piece of wood for you. Okay, so that's the basics, and what we'll do then in the next video is go through taking this particular saw apart, cleaning it up. What we'll do is we'll dress the bar that came off it. As you can see there, that blue in colour there indicates significant heat, which means it wasn't either getting oil or the chain was blunt. There's a bit of a burr rising on that bar. We'll fix that, and do a general maintenance on the bar, general maintenance on the chain, and give the saw itself a bit of a clean up. Okay, so anyway, thanks.